Jesus, my Lord and my Savior? Have you met Jesus, my wonderful King? Your longing heart He will fill to overflowing with sweet satisfaction.
We are in a series of 3 sermons, and this is the last of the 3. They are all focused on colporteur experiences, colporteur stories. And the title of this one is When All Hope is Gone. The first one was Escape. If you were here, you probably will remember why it was called Escape. The second one was When God Works. And if you were here last week, you will remember why that was named that. Today we're going to talk about When All Hope is Gone, because sometimes it is, isn't it? We've probably all had those experiences where it just looked like there was no way out. I can think back over the years how many times my wife and I have sat down with a mountain of bills and a little paycheck and shook our heads and said, there's no way. This is not going to work. And then at the end of the month, we look back and say, how did that work? I don't know how God does it, but somehow He pulls us through when there seems to be no way. So today we're going to talk about when all hope is gone. Bow your heads with me. Father, as we look into your word, we recognize our need of your guidance. We're not here because we think we can do it. We're here because we know we need you to do it. We need you to explain it, give us understanding, come into our hearts and minds, and give us a clear picture of how you would guide our steps into the path that you have chosen, the path that will lead us to your throne in eternity. We know it's a different path for every person. We all have different trials, different obstacles, different difficulties. But you are the God who is able to meet and surmount every one of those in our life. And so we pray for your guidance as we travel through this earth. I ask, Lord, that you'll not allow me to interfere with your message. Please allow your words to flow across my lips and touch my heart and my understanding as you do for each one here. In Jesus' name, amen. I actually only worked as a colporteur for 10 months. At the end of that time, and I think I told you last week, for 10 months the Lord blessed me so much that I led the entire Lake Union in sales for every month, even my very first month, for 10 months. And at the end of that time, they made me an area director, which meant I had to relocate to the Detroit, Michigan area. And I had that whole corner of Michigan from Port Huron over just south of Flint and down to by Ann Arbor, Michigan, and everything in that area was mine to cover. And I had about 7 colporteurs working for me. Changed from time to time because I would train more. I think by the time I left, I had more than that. But at any rate, my job description had changed. Now I was to teach other people how to do what I had been doing for 10 months. And I did some things that were a little bit new and unique to the colporteur work. And I'm just going to insert them here in case there's somebody listening to this out in wherever this signal goes, who might want some ideas. While I was the area director, all of my colporteurs qualified. Now, to qualify means that you get insurance. And if you don't sell a certain amount, you don't get insurance. And I just felt like that was so unfair. We already don't give colporteurs any respect. You know that. They're like at the bottom of the outreach perception. You know, the perception we have in our minds. We have people like Dwight Nelson and Doug Batchelor, and then we have other evangelists, and then we probably put some of our favorite preachers, and then after that comes our pastor, and then below that is call porters. And so I wanted to raise that a little bit, at least in the minds of the call porters. I wanted them to know that they are appreciated. So my commitment to them was that they would always be qualified. And that meant that as we got close to the end of the month, if I had a call porter who was not qualified, then I would go out and work with him and make sure he was. We would get enough sales to qualify him for that month. And I never had a call porter have even one month that he wasn't qualified. Even the people I just hired. You know, if I hired a new call porter, I made sure they were qualified every month. And then every month, at the beginning of the month, I had a breakfast. And all of my call porters were invited to breakfast. And I had found a restaurant owner who would work with me, and we had a buffet that was better than anything you'll find at Luby's. I mean, we had everything. We had hash browns and scrambled eggs, and we had Morningstar Farms sausage, both kinds, the patties and the links. And we had homemade biscuits that were just, like grands, and 2 or 3 kinds of juices. I mean, I really put it on for them. And we had a meeting room in this restaurant where the buffet was set up. And in that meeting room, that was just ours. The rest of the restaurant was separate. We had our own room here. And I had a board set up. I had bought some styrofoam and made a big board, and I covered it with a blow-up of the map of our area. And that map was covered with balloons. And every balloon had money in it. I put $300 up on the board every month. There was a $100 bill, there was 2 $50 bills, there was 2 20s, 2 10s, 2 5s, and the rest were $1 bills. But I put $300 up on the board every month. And then, when a call porter came to my breakfast, for every $1,000 that he had sold that previous month, I gave him a dart. And I had call porters who would get as many as 10 darts, $10,000 in sales. So they got some extra money. And every month I would go out and sell at least one cash sale. Now, it's not always easy to get a cash sale, but the Lord blessed, and every month I would have one cash sale, and whoever was the high call porter for the month, I would give him that cash sale to turn in with his sales. Now the other call porter said, "That's not fair. He's already sold $10,000. You should give it to the one who had the lowest sales." No, I went out with the one who had the lowest sales, and I made sure he was qualified. I did my bit for him. But the one who got the most sales got a free cash sale. I had pastors come in from the various churches and have a devotional for us. And the pastors loved it. Coming to my call porter breakfast, they not only got a great breakfast, and they got to give a devotional to people who really appreciate devotionals, but I also gave them a dart. And the pastor got to be the first one to throw. Now, I never had a pastor get the $100 bill. That never turned out that way. But the potential was there. And so all the call porters would kind of cringe when the pastor was throwing his dart, because they were hoping that $100 bill would still be up there when they got their turn to throw a dart. Anyway, we had a big time. We had a good time. It was good camaraderie, just a real opportunity for us to share stories and experiences and to go out refreshed and spend another month serving the Lord. In our first year, we doubled our sales. In our second year, we doubled again. So it worked. That mentality, that approach really got people excited. And that district grew more than I could take credit for. The Lord just blessed us in a very powerful way. But on this particular day, I was going to work with Larry. Now, Larry was a great Christian. Still is. You would like him. Especially if he came to your house as a call porter, you would like him better than you would like me. For a couple of reasons. One, he gave a beautiful canvas. I mean, I don't think I ever got to the point where I could give a canvas as good as his. And the other reason you would like him better than me is that when somebody said no, he left. If somebody said, no, we don't want these, or we can't afford these, Larry would put all of his books back in the case and he would get up and leave. He never tried the second time. He didn't have what I would call the killer instinct. He didn't know how to go for the jugular. And, that may sound bad for a preacher to say that, but when you're talking about the Lord's work, think about it. It's our job to make sure they die. Because if you don't die to self, you will never live for Jesus. And so when you're presenting the gospel, you have to go for the jugular. You have to have a killer instinct. Because the person you're presenting to has to die. Or you're just wasting your time. But it was nice to have Larry in the house. He was not obnoxious. He wasn't pushy. And he gave a beautiful canvas. And then he would have prayer and leave. Which meant that at the end of the month, he usually didn't have very many sales. And so it was near the end of the month, and I was going to take Larry out and get him qualified. He only needed one more sale. He was pretty close. I don't remember the figures, but it seems to me like you had to have about maybe $1,200 a month to qualify. That may be wrong, but that's kind of what sticks in my mind. And he was within about $400 of that, so he just needed one more good sale and he would be qualified. So we went out, and it was miserable. It was winter. I know you guys don't understand that word down here, but I was in Michigan and it was winter. And there was snow that was, on the yards it was probably a foot thick. On the streets, a lot of it had been beaten down, but it had been turned into a slush that was still 4 or 5 inches thick, and you couldn't get out of your car without getting your feet wet. When it's below zero, or not zero, but when it's below freezing and your feet are wet, that, in the dictionary where it says miserable, there's a picture of that right beside it. A call porter with wet feet. That's what miserable is. And we had been out working all day, and it looked like I was going to have to go out with him again because it just wasn't happening. Nobody was home. We had a half a dozen lead cards. Nobody was home. We had knocked on some other doors. Either they weren't home or they weren't interested. And I was wet and cold and hungry, and I just wanted to go home. You ever been there? All hope was gone. In my heart, in my mind, all hope was gone. I just needed to go home and recoup and start fresh another day. This day was shot. And I said so. It was getting dark, and we hadn't had any success all day long. And I looked over at Larry and I said, I think we just need to go home and get warm, and we'll try this again tomorrow. And Larry, now, to understand what I'm about to say, what I'm about to tell you is a miracle. Because what you're going to hear in the next few words is not Larry. Larry was milquetoast. Larry was docile. Larry was agreeable. You know the person I'm describing? He was a great guy, just not a great salesman. And when I said that, Larry looked at me and he said, "No." I said, "What?" He said, "No. We're going to do this until we have a sale tonight. We're not quitting." Whoa. I said, "Okay." I mean, I have been trying, since I got there, I had been trying to give Larry an attitude like that. Every time I would take him out, I would try to build that kind of gumption into him. And so when he displayed it, I wished it had been at a different time, when my feet had been dry and warm, but there was no way I could kill it. This is what I've been looking for from Larry. So we had one card left. It was on the campus of the university there in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's where we were working, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it's a huge campus. And we had driven through there looking for this address. Campus housing, is hard to track down sometimes. And we'd looked at every number that we could see from the street, which meant this number was one that you had to see from inside the campus. You had to get out of your car, walk through the snow into the middle of a bunch of dormitories and try to find this address. So after I had driven everywhere I could drive, and finally it was proven to me that we couldn't do it from the car, then I parked and I took my poor blue feet out of the car and put them back in the slush, and we started slogging our way across campus. And we finally found the number. And we knocked on the door, and this young man came to the door. And I showed him the card, and actually I think Larry showed him the card. And he invited us in out of the cold, and we sat down. He said, just hold on a minute. My wife sent that in. She's upstairs nursing our newborn. She'll be down in a moment. And she was. She was like 2 minutes. She came down the stairs, and she was excited because she wanted the Bible story, the blue books that you see in the doctor's office. She wanted that Bible story set for her baby. And when she saw the Uncle Arthur's bedtime story, she wanted that too. And Larry gave a beautiful canvas, just like he always did. And I was ready to close it. I had all my ducks in a row. I knew exactly what I was going to do because I knew Larry wouldn't do it. So I was going to have to close this sale after he made his beautiful canvas. But instead, when he concluded, the young man reached in his pocket and took out a credit card and said, my dad is a doctor and he pays, this card pays for everything. We go out to eat. As a matter of fact, he said, you came at the exact moment. If you had come 3 minutes earlier, we wouldn't have been here. And if you had come 3 minutes later, we would have been gone. You came at the exact moment that you needed to, because we just stopped in briefly for my wife to nurse the baby, and then we're going back out to eat. But he said, this card pays for everything. It bought my car, it pays my rent, it buys our groceries, and it'll buy your books. And he handed Larry that card. I didn't even have to close it. It was so easy. And God's timing is so great. If we hadn't gone through everything else that we went through, we would have gotten to this apartment earlier. They would not have been home. We would have counted it off for that day and probably maybe even lost track of it, not even got back. But God just worked everything out, and Larry wouldn't let me quit, which was amazing. He never acted that way again, by the way. And when I left the call porter work, I guess I'll tell you this. I knew that Larry was not suited to the call porter work. He's a great guy, but that wasn't his calling. And I worked in Christian Record Braille for a year after I left the call porter work, and that was so boring to me. It was like ingathering all year long. The blind camp was fun. I loved that. But the rest of the year, when you're just out there asking for money, I was just so bored with that. But I realized at the end of that year that it was perfect for Larry. You don't have to, there's no hard closes. You walk into a business, you show them what you're doing, they all have a budget. Every major business has a budget already set aside for things like this. And so when you show them what you're doing for the blind and for the kids that are blind, they will give you part of their budget. And it's just so easy. And that in 1 year's time, I had that territory to the point that it was generating $50,000 in income. And so at the end of the year, I realized I couldn't do another year. I was just, it was so boring. I just couldn't face another year of that. So I drove over to Larry's house. He just lived about a quarter of a mile from me. And I pulled in his yard just as he was getting ready to leave and go to work. And, I had been his area director, so he was used to doing what I asked him to do. And I said, Larry, come spend the day with me. And so he said, okay. And he put his books back in the house, and he got in the car. And I took him with me all day long, and I showed him what I do. And I said, Larry, did I do anything today that you couldn't do? And he said, no, this is great. This is like the greatest job. I said, Larry, if you just do what I did today, you'll make $50,000 this year. And I said, would you like to do that? As a call porter, Larry had been making about $7,000. I mean, he was not cut out for the call porter work, but he was great. He would be great at this other job. And so he said, yeah, I would like that. And so I called the office and I said, I'm quitting, but I've got a replacement. And we put Larry in that position. Do you know, within 6 months, they made him a leader. And he became one of the administrators in the Christian Record Braille work. It was his ministry. He was made for it. He was good at it. At any rate, that wasn't part of my sermon, but I thought you'd want to hear what happened with Larry. And not long after that time, I hired a young man named Jeff. I'm not going to tell you last names because this is being recorded, and I don't want to embarrass anybody. But Jeff, young man, just in love with the Lord, wanted to serve the Lord. After about a year as a call porter, he went to Andrews, took theology, went through seminary, became a pastor. This was one step along the way for Jeff. So I was just beginning to train him, and I had a lead card in, I think it's called St. Clair, Michigan. It's been a while since I've been there, and my mind maybe doesn't get everything just right, but I think it was St. Clair. And we went to this home. It was beautiful. The neighborhood was gorgeous. The house, I'm going to guess, even back then, was probably $3 or $4 million house. They had matching Mercedes-Benz, and the license plate said his and hers. Once I got inside and I could see the back of the house was all glass, and it backed up to I think it's the St. Clair River. The river that runs through St. Clair. I don't remember if that's called St. Clair River or St. James River, but anyway, the river that runs through there. They had a yacht on that river that probably cost more than the house. This guy obviously was rolling in the dough. And went up and knocked on the door. The wife came to the door. And when she saw that we were from the Bible story, she was excited. She said, yes, I want those for my children. By the way, they had a boy and a girl. And they both had these little electric cars. And they had license plates that said his and hers. This family had everything. But when I showed her where we were from, she at first was excited, but then she said, you're going to have to come back. She said, my husband doesn't let me have a checkbook or a credit card, and he makes all the business decisions. You have to come back. So I said, okay, we'll do that. I normally didn't do that. Callbacks are a waste of time, most of the time. But I could see, the pain really on her face and the sincerity in her eyes, and she really wanted the books. She just couldn't do it without her husband. So I said, okay, we'll come back. So we came back later that evening when she told us. I think it was about 5 o'clock in the evening. We came back. And the man answered the door, her husband. And I started to show him, who we were and where we were from. He put up his hand. He said, I'm sorry, we're not interested. And he started to close the door. I said, wait a minute. I came here the first time because your wife sent in a card asking for me to come. I drove over 100 miles. I came back the second time because she assured me that this is something she's interested in, and you hold the purse strings. I think you owe me at least enough time to hear what I'm here for. And he said, oh, all right, I guess I do. See, Larry would never have done that. So we went in, and that's when I got to see the yacht out back, because the back of the house was all glass. It was just gorgeous. The living room, you're going to think I'm exaggerating, but their living room was more than half the size of this sanctuary. You take probably the far edge of this carpet here all the way to that wall and all the way back to that wall. That's their living room. And they had a grand piano. Not the kind you buy at the common, everyday piano store, but it was Steinway. It was a Steinway. It was about 18 feet long, the kind that you pay $100,000 for. It was that kind of piano. And it was sitting on white carpet that was so thick, I thought my shoes were going to get stuck and come off, like when you walk in mud, it felt that. The carpet felt like that. And the furniture was kind of spread out around the room. Now, in a sales situation, I'll just give you this little insight. Seating is critical. It's absolutely critical. Number one, you have to have husband and wife sitting side by side. Why? Because you don't want them signaling each other from behind your back. You don't want to be talking to one of them while the other one is going. So they have to sit side by side, and you have to be close enough that you can kind of control the dynamic of the presentation. You can't have them over there and you're over here, and no, you got to be close. And the carpet was so thick that I didn't feel I could rearrange the furniture. Now, I have done that. I've walked into people's houses and moved furniture around to get it the way I need it to be. But in this house, I knew that if I moved a chair, it would make an indentation in that carpet that would not go away quickly. And I just didn't feel like I could do that. So I got Mom and Dad and the kids, 2 children, sitting on a couch, and then I knelt down in front of them on the carpet. And I made the presentation of my life. I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. Maybe for that one day, I was almost as good as Larry. I mean, it was smooth, it was professional, it was everything it should be, and Dad just wasn't buying it. He was cold, he was aloof, he was not involved. You can see all that, in people's faces. And I made several attempts, several tries. I just could not get Dad involved. The Holy Spirit was there. Mom was weeping openly. I mean, it was a very spiritual presentation. Even the 2 children sitting on the couch both had tears in their eyes. They were convicted by the Holy Spirit that their home needed to have the altar built to the Lord. They needed to have daily worship. They needed to spend time with Jesus. I had the whole family in the palm of my hand. But the Dad, he wasn't having it. And he said several things. I remember at one point he tried to throw me off track, and he said, you have done a super job here. He said, I have over 100 salespeople working for me. I don't think one of them could have come in here and did the job that you just did, presenting that. He said, as a matter of fact, whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. Come to work for me and I'll double it. I didn't tell him I'd walked away from $250,000 a year to take this job. I just knew he was wasting my time with all of that. He was trying to throw up smoke screens and get me off track. That's all he was doing. And when we got right down to the end, I knew I still didn't have him. And he was the one with the checkbook, The wife, there's nothing I could do that would help me by talking to the wife. I had to have him. And I didn't. And finally, he said, he had a dilemma. Here was his dilemma. He needed to be able to get rid of me and still be the hero in his family's eyes. They wanted it. It was obvious. There was no way to get around it. His wife was weeping. She wanted those books so badly. And even the kids had tears in their eyes. So he needed to get me out of his house and still be a hero to his family. That was his dilemma. And so finally he came up with this. He said, I know you look around you and you think this guy's got lots of money, but the truth is the economy is hurting right now. We have fallen on hard times. And, yeah, really. We have fallen on hard times, and you've just come at a bad time. I wish I could do this, but it's just, right now, we just don't have it. I almost made the mistake of my life. I almost laughed, like this young lady just did. I almost laughed in his face. He spent more money on his two kids' little electric cars than we're talking about for these books. He spent more money on almost anything in this house that I could point to than he would be spending on these books. So it was hilarious. I almost laughed in his face. But then I realized what he was doing. You see, if I laughed at him, or if I said, that's ridiculous, now he can be indignant with me. He can say, look, I invited you into my home. I've shown you hospitality. I've listened to everything you had to say. And then you're going to disrespect me like that in front of my kids? I think it's time for you to leave. He didn't get to say those words because the Lord stopped me before I made that blunder. But I could see it. Once the Lord tapped my shoulder and showed me what was happening, I saw what was coming. And I thought, wow, this is just, I don't have an answer. I guess all hope is gone. And then, you see, when all hope is gone in our minds, God is still able. And God showed it to me. He made it so clear, I smiled. I had a frown because I knew all hope was gone, and this guy knew it. He knew I was beaten. I could see it on his face. He had me between a rock and a hard place. No matter what I did, I was going to lose. And he knew it. And you could just see it written all over his face. And when I smiled, his look changed. He thought, uh-oh. What has he thought of? There's no way out of this. How could he be smiling? But you see, God had showed me that this man had just backed himself into a corner that he could not get out of. And I did something I never did before and I never did after. And when we left that home, I told Jeff to never do it. But in this one case, I looked at him with all the sympathy I could muster. And I said, "Sir, I am so sorry. I know this must be terrible for you. Your children are here watching, and you've been able to provide for them all of their lives. You've given them everything they wanted. And now to have to confess that you can't do it again. That has to just be heartbreaking for you. I am so sorry. And I said, it hurts me so much that I'm going to do something for you I have never done before. I'm going to pay for your books. And I'll just, I'll come by here whenever I'm in the neighborhood, and, if you've got $5 or $10, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to charge you interest. You just, whatever you got, you can pay on them until it gets paid for. Oh, his ego couldn't take it. I mean, here's a man who could, if he wanted a new Mercedes-Benz, he could fly to Germany and buy it at the factory and fly it back. I mean, he could do anything he wanted to do. And the idea that this little door-to-door salesman was going to have to buy books for his children was just, his ego just could not take that. And he said to me, I guess I can do it. And he reached in his pocket. Now, with the books that I had showed them, we were looking at about $840. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was around $840. And he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out a roll of $100 bills that would choke a hippo. I mean, I don't even know how he fit that in his pocket, but he peeled off 9 $100 bills, and he handed them to me, and he said, keep the change, you earned it. Well, it was God who earned it. But when all hope is gone, you see, when we can't think of a way out, God knows. If you just listen to His voice, He is always there. He's always pointing the way. He's always guiding our step. He will always show you how to have victory. Always. You can depend on Him. He loves you so much that He died in your place. I was in Lagodi, Indiana. That's a high-density Amish country. But I was in downtown, near downtown Lagodi, and so these were not Amish people. And actually was in the home of a Catholic family. They had told me that. And I could see, Mary on the wall and all the different things they have in, a typical Catholic home. And I was training a young man. I think his name was Robert. I'm pretty sure that's who it was. And so I was letting him do the canvas, and he did. He was learning. It was new to him. I think this might have been his third or fourth one, but he was starting to get good at it, and he did a reasonably good job presenting the books. But as was usually the case, men, we have no reason to be proud of this fact, but it's usually the men who are not interested. And it was that way in this case too. The husband, he just wasn't fazed. And Robert had taken 2 or 3 attempts at closing it, and it just wasn't happening. And so I decided it was time to step in, and I made an attempt to close it, and it still wasn't happening. And at that point, the father said to me, and this is an exact quote. I may not remember everybody's name, but I can remember exactly what he said. He said, "We have good children." And I'm sure that these books are beneficial in a lot of families. But our children are good Catholic children. And we just don't need something like this in our home. Now, as he was saying the word home, as that last syllable was coming across his lips, the door to the living room burst open, and his son chased his daughter through the living room, yelling words that I can't say in church, and threatening to kill her. And then they burst out of the living room and into the backyard, where he proceeded to chase her around the house. still yelling obscenities and threatening to kill her. And the father looked at me almost in the same breath and said, "Do you suppose God is trying to tell me something?" I didn't answer his question. I took out my order pad and I started to write. And he got his checkbook and he bought the books. Now, I am not telling you that God got those children to use profanity. God doesn't work that way. But if it's going on, God does know how to time things just right. And His timing is perfect. I have countless stories I can tell you about the timing of God. And it couldn't have been more perfect. I mean, just as the last syllable was leaving his mouth, bam! And I can't tell you what they said, but bam! Back out in the backyard. And you could see murder in this kid. I don't know what she did to him, but you could see murder in his eyes. And then the man actually closed our sale for us when he said, "Do you suppose God is telling me something?" It was, I think, that very same day, although I'm not certain of that, but I think it was that same day. We were in an Amish home, and again, I was having Robert give the canvas. He was learning. And by the way, that's the hardest thing. I'm going to be 70 pretty soon. I've done a lot of hard things, but the hardest thing is for somebody who knows how to do it to watch somebody who doesn't know how to do it. But you have to. They have to learn. So Robert was giving the canvas, and he did a good job, but they weren't buying. And so after a couple of attempts, I stepped in and I continued what he had begun, and they still weren't buying. And it looked like I had exhausted all of my resources. I mean, I couldn't think of anything else. We'd done everything I knew to do, and it just wasn't happening. So it was time to have prayer and leave. All hope was gone. And then, almost audible. I mean, I've never heard God's voice audibly, but it was so strong, it was almost audible. And God showed me why this Amish man wasn't interested. And I looked at him and I realized that's it. That is it. What God just said to me is the reason. You see, we had not shown him anything that he didn't already know. I mean, we'd given kind of like a mini Bible study. We'd gone through the books. We'd shared what, different things meant. But we hadn't shown him anything that he didn't already know. And so I said, "Sir, I would just like to share something with you, if that would be all right." And he said, in the way the Amish do, he said, "Sure, that will be fine." And his wife was sitting there, his children were there. And I said, when we read the Bible, everything is going so fast. Do you realize that sheep will only drink from still water? And he said, "Yeah, this is true. Yeah. Sheep will only drink from the still water. You have to stop the stream from flowing, or they won't get the drink. They die. The sheep will die. If you don't have the still water, they die." And I said, it's that way when we read the Bible, too. Sometimes it's going so fast. I took him to, I think it's John chapter 4, about the woman at the well. And I said, you see here, in just 3 or 4 verses, we've already passed up the story. Jesus has crossed a desert place. I said, the purpose of these books, and by the way, folks, the purpose of a sermon, is to slow the Word of God down so that we can get a drink. And I said, I want you to just take a few moments and think about what happened that day, because that's what this chapter in this book does. It slows the story down so that we can get a drink. Jesus and His disciples had just crossed a desert. Jesus was hungry. He was even weak from his hunger, which is why He sent the disciples on into town to buy food, and He sat by the well. I know that Ellen White says he stayed there because he knew he had an appointment, and I'm not disagreeing with that. He did know about the Samaritan woman. He knew what was going to happen. But he was also very tired and very weak, very hungry, and very thirsty. Because when she came out, what's the first thing he asked for? A drink of water. And I looked at the Amish father and I said, "Sir, you realize the miracle that just happened?" And he said, "Miracle?" No, he didn't say that. He said, "Miracle? What miracle?" I said, Jesus had been sitting beside that well all alone. Nobody was watching Him. And when the Samaritan woman got there, He was still thirsty. This is the Creator God. You know, all He had to do was speak a word and that well could have been a fountain. He could have had all the water He wanted. But when the Samaritan woman got to the well, Jesus was still thirsty. And I said, "Do you know what makes that so important?" He said, "What?" I said, Jesus came here with two jobs to do. Number one, He came to this earth to show us how to live. Number two, He came to pay for the fact that we don't do it. He showed us how to live, and then He paid for the fact that we don't do it. And if He had performed a miracle to benefit Himself, He would have no longer been my example. He would have failed in His mission. Because if Chuck Woods was sitting by that well, I couldn't get a drink. I couldn't turn it into a fountain. So Jesus lived the way you and I have to live so that He could give us a life that makes it possible for us to live the way He lives in His kingdom. He came to planet Earth and He lived like us, for us. And the fact that He was still thirsty when the Samaritan woman got to the well proves to me He did not fail as my Savior. He said, "Well, you need to fill out the paperwork. I go get the money." That was it. He just needed to see something that he didn't already know. And he was happy to buy those books after he saw that. But that, you see, you understand, that wasn't me. I had exhausted all of my sales ability, everything I had put into that. I had a man here trying to learn how to do the job. I wanted him to see success. I wanted to be a good trainer. And so I'd done everything I could think of. And I couldn't do it. And then God spoke. And after God spoke, I don't think you could have stopped that Amish man from buying the books. You know, when God works, it works. Isn't that what we want in each of our lives? You know, we began with Acts 27:20, when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared and no small tempest lay on us. All hope that we should be saved was then taken away. All hope was gone. And I'm going to preach a sermon just on this story. So I don't want you to think that I think I'm exhausting this story today. You're going to get a sermon just on this story. But for right now, I want you to think about what happened next. The shipwreck, Paul and everybody wind up on the shore. They start a bonfire. Paul picks up a bundle of sticks that has a viper in it, and that snake bites him before he can get rid of it. All the people expect him to die imminently. His death is imminent. In Acts 28, verse 4, when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live." And he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. See, this is a prophecy of the end of this world. Because the world is going to look upon those who have the seal of God and who refuse the mark of the beast, and they're going to think that we are going to suffer the vengeance of God. But the truth is that in the very near future, we will shake off the serpent into the fire, and we will feel no harm. That day is coming, folks. That day is fast approaching. And the only question is what Jesus asked: when I return, will I find faith? Will we still be trusting in His Word, in His power, in His wisdom? Or will we think it all rests upon our shoulders? Because if we think it rests on our shoulders, I promise you, we will fail. We will be defeated. We will be lost. But if our faith and our confidence is in Him, He doesn't know how to lose. And He will bring victory to each of us.
In gladsome surrender.